I really enjoyed your book, Resort. So, as you know, I used to live in the DR. And I was thinking about where exactly in the DR was your family from?
So first of all, thank you so much for reading it. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for making time to talk about the book. I really appreciate it. So my family is from San Cristobal, which is in the south of the island. I would say 30 minutes from Santo Domingo, southwest. So from the capital. But it's, I mean, we're not on the coast, but it's like pretty close to get to the beach.
So are they still there?
No, I mean, none of my family is in that town. I have some family members that are there. My brother lives in the capital, and I have some half siblings that I didn't grow up being close to that are also in the country. But everyone that I grew up with on my mother's side is in New York or like, you know, in the United States.
Okay, right on. Yeah. Because when I was trying to picture that resort, is it near Punta Cana? Is that like?
Well, I mean, the idea, it's a fictional place, but the idea was that the closest airport is Punta Cana, but it's several hours away. So I imagined it being like past Samana, like in the ocean.
Okay.
So like a place that doesn't exist.
Oh, that's what that was my second guess. I was like, I mean, because all right, the last time I went to the DR in 2006, and there's that gorgeous beach, right? But they were about to put a resort there. Did they?
I don't know. I haven't been to that part of the island actually in at least 5 years.
Okay.
So I'm not 100% sure what it looks like. Yeah, the last time I went, my kids were really little, so it might be more than 5 years. I haven't been to the Samana area in a long time. But yeah, I mean, they're always developing. I mean, that's the thing about the Caribbean, right? There's like constant construction, constant development. So I'm not surprised to hear that the last time you were there, they were putting up a hotel.
Well, because it was, I think it was called Horseshoe Beach. It was gorgeous, right? But it was pretty clear that pretty soon this beach that had been public before was going to become private, right? And it was interesting when I was reading this, I was like, oh yeah, that is why I hate resort. I will not stay in a resort. I will never stay in a resort. And it's because when I was in high school and I was in the DR, I was watching that, right? Like, and I think it was also my parents, when other people's parents would come down, they would take them to resorts. And my parents were like, no, we're not going to a resort. We're going to go to a hotel. Yeah, it's just interesting to think about that. So, yeah. Well, hold on. Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
DR question. Okay, so the Jarabacoa Resort, that was something you made up?
Yes.
Okay. Woo-hoo. I love that area so much. Do you ever go there?
Yeah, I mean, the last time I was there last August, and my family and I went. We just spent a day, but I'm going this August, and we're planning to stay a week in Jarabacoa. Yeah,
that area is so pretty. But isn't it?
I know so many people that just love going to Jarabacoa. They just adore it.
But isn't it crazy? I went to reform school there.
It is crazy. I mean, every time you talk about it, I think it's so bizarre because my experience in DR obviously is so different than what you went through. And I can't even imagine that your experience there is horrifying. So yeah, it's a beautiful place.
But that's the thing. Half the reason why my brain didn't completely break is because it's so gorgeous there, right? That's one of the most, I just feel hard, except for you say it so much better than me, but I mean, it's just one of the most beautiful places. How like you're supposed to like sometimes think of your happy place. And I just like think about like being up in the mountains and looking at the valley. And yeah, it's so beautiful there. Yeah. Okay. So I guess, yeah. So that was my question, was how have you seen the DR like impacted by resort? Can you just talk more about that? Like your experience, you left when you were 10, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what has that been to watch that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So when I left and I was 10 years old, I mean, my family and I definitely didn't have very much money. So we weren't people that were going to the beach very often or even going to hotels or vacationing. I mean, we were like a working class family. And I still remember to this day, the first time I saw a beach was after my mother traveled to the United States. I mean, I'm sure they took me when I was a baby, but my first conscious memory was going with one of my mom's friends when I was 7 years old. And it was like a few weeks after my mother traveled to the United States. I think I was probably 7. Yeah. It's interesting because the next time that I traveled to the United States after arriving here at 10 was after college. I was in my 20s. And when I went to the Dominican Republic, I went to go to a resort. I mean, I went to go on vacation to the DR.
Yeah, right.
And you're talking about how you don't like resorts. I love resorts. I mean, I have to say, like, as a vacationer, like just being in one place where like everything is taken care of, everything is tailored to your needs. It's just pleasure paradise. The pool is there, the beach is there, the food is there whenever you need it, massages on demand. I mean, it's just what is there not to love. But you know, being a local, I think because my class has changed so much in like, you know, since I left the Dominican Republic, when I travel to these resorts, I'm very aware of like the class distinction and who is serving versus who's vacationing there. And I'm also really aware, oddly, about the fact that had I not immigrated, I'm not convinced that I would be able to like partake in that kind of activity, right? So on the one hand, there's like a part of me that feels just, I love it. I love vacations. I love relaxing. And I think that there's something that feels subversive about the fact that like my immigrant dream enabled me to live a life in the Dominican Republic that probably wouldn't have been available to me. And I love talking to workers. And so I travel a lot into the Caribbean with my husband, not just to the. And so I find myself very often interviewing and talking to people casually or more formally about what it's like to work in the resorts, what it's like to be tending to tourists and to rich people. And so some of those conversations actually really aided in me writing this book.
I mean, that was kind of my next question was, can you talk about, obviously, I didn't watch it, but obviously this book's kind of in conversation with The White Lotus, right?
Yes.
You know, but from a completely different perspective, right? And so can you talk about bringing that in, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because a few of my blurbers, like Alejandro Varela, who I adore, writer, he was the author of City of Babylon, and he has a forthcoming book called Middle Spoon, which I can't wait to read. But he called it White Lotus literary thriller. I love the fact that the connection he made immediately to the book. And I'll tell you that was so interesting to me is that I started writing this book during the pandemic. So in 2020, I had finished writing my book, which you know, because you've been my friend, you were there. But I had finished writing my book and PJ was ready to send it. We were ready to go to market. And then we realized we couldn't send it to market because there was a pandemic and like the publishing industry had kind of screeched to a halt. And so we were just sitting on my book, even though I was done doing edits. We were just waiting until the time changed. And then so in like the spring of 2020, we were all on lockdown and I started writing these short stories. I started writing these stories from the perspective of employees in a resort. And at the time, I really wanted to, all of them were going to be employees. And I knew that the central thread of the story was the fact that they were all in service to the resort in one way or another, you know? And so I started writing the stories that year. And then in 2022, when like the first season of The White Lotus came out, I was so upset because I was like, they beat me to it. They stole my idea. And I remember talking to my agent and he was like, this is not a bad thing. Like, this is not bad news, you know? So when we put together the proposal, because I actually sold this book as a novel proposal, I hadn't finished writing the whole book. And when we put together the sample chapters and the novel outline, he was like, let's see how this goes, you know, and we might have to write the whole book before we sell it, but let's see how it goes with a novel outline. And in some ways, I think the fact that the book is so clearly in conversation with this social phenomenon that has become The White Lotus but that is very much centrally concerned with privilege from a different perspective,
Right.
I think also aided in the speed with which the book was picked up by my editor. So that's, it's good news that there's this, this huge show that I think in some ways is concerned with some of the themes that I'm concerned about: class, privilege, kind of the darker sides of humanity, that I think in some ways this novel makes you think about what is complicity and what is freedom, and to what extent do we compromise ourselves for those we love. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of The White Lotus, but I think my book and that show are very different.
Oh, yeah,
They're in conversation.
Yeah, I haven't. Right now, I have two other different stream. Right now, I'm not on HBO, so I haven't watched it. It's like there's only so many streaming services that you want.
That's right.
I've read enough about it, that, yeah. I also thought, okay, I really liked, you have a number of characters that are all related to this resort somehow. But at the core, it's like two sisters, right? And they're really complicated people. And can you discuss writing really complicated people?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that.
Too much.
No, I know. I'm like trying to have a spoiler-free conversation with you. It's gonna be difficult. But I have to tell you, like, I think one of the things that I realized after writing Neruda on the Park is that I'm just kind of obsessed with the idea of relationships, and I'm really obsessed with the idea of the way that I think grief and loss have this effect on people, and one of the things that I'm most interested in is the way in which grief turns people into monsters. So I think a lot about, in my own life, the way that I have seen people who have suffered great losses, and those losses like sometimes linger in such a way that they really deteriorate the person's personality, or like even maybe the potential of who they could have been had they been able to get past certain losses. And so after I finished, working on Neruda on the Park, which is my debut, is centrally concerned with a mother-daughter relationship. Yeah. I started writing this book, and it took a while for me to realize that the protagonists were these two sisters. Like when I first started writing the book, I thought it was gonna be much more with Laura, who is, the older sister and is the manager at the resort, and Pablo, who is, another worker who works for her. And when I started conceiving of this novel, I thought that the story was going to move, the plot was going to move through those two people. And it was truly only when I really dug into Laura as a character, the fact that her mother died when she was quite young, and her father suffers from addiction and gambling. And so she ended up taking a motherhood role to her little sister, Elena, when she herself was a child. And, a lot of the compromises that she has made by way of work and prioritizing work and making work the center of her life are all motivated by the love she feels for her little sister, and the fact that she wants her little sister to have this better life and to have a path to success that does not require her to be in servitude. Once I figured out that a lot of what would animate the plot is, the fact that Laura wants her younger sister to grow up. She feels like in some ways, the fact that she was able to have her sister grow up in this resort and have her sister be educated in this elite, kind of virtual global school, has in some ways like toxified her sister's ability to function in the real world. And she feels she's now like lost a sense of responsibility and like maturity. And so, Elena, who's only 17 years old, by the way, in this book, she's like a normal kid, she's just graduated from high school. She's doing a little bit of drugs. She likes ecstasy. She likes to party. She doesn't like being a babysitter. But like the fact that her sister, like what kicks off the plot is just that, Elena has an accident with like a tourist child because she's being neglectful. And then, Laura decides she wants to like teach her sister a lesson, and she's going to pretend that this tourist child died. And then that just that decision sets up this disaster of a sequence of events for these two sisters. And so I was really interested in thinking about the ways in which, love can sometimes be the only thing that can save you, but it can also be the thing that like really can harm you if you're not very, very careful. And I also wanted to like test these two women who have very different ideals, put them on this pressure cooker of this resort and kind of the fast pace of what happens over the course of this 1 week in their lives that changes them forever. And so I was really interested in seeing the way that these two women would react. And I just wanted both of them to be really complicated. Like I know that I wanted these characters to make decisions that a reader might empathize with at the beginning, but that as the plot progressed, you would be more and more horrified about what's happening. And so, I hope that it's an interesting ride, because I know that part of what I was interested in is really kind of putting these two young women in like this kind of pressure cooker of a situation that would like force them to reckon with both their relationships and who they are in the world, but who they want to be further into the future.
Yeah. It was very fascinating. So, yeah, and it actually went a lot of different ways. I had no idea. I very much enjoyed it. So
I'm so glad. Thank you.
Yeah. I was thinking while you were talking, so thinking about you writing this book on proposal and selling it on proposal, do you think, like, did that change the book, do you think, writing it that way, than if you had just written it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, because like when you make a proposal, the way that it worked with this book is that it started as a collection of short stories. So like I all along had this idea that the book would be 7 days.
Yeah.
And I really wanted like the book, because I was writing it, like I said before, it was the pandemic. So each time I came to like one of these characters, I was really thinking about escape. And, a lot of what gave me joy was writing about these really flawed people that keep making terrible decisions. I just wanted to follow these people who you're kind of horrified and also very surprised at what they do. Because that's the kind of fiction that sweeps me away, is when I read books where like characters are unpredictable and, you read on and you can't really believe that the story went there. What's so interesting is that like I had conceived the book to go a certain way. And I believe that there's a love story between Pablo and Vida. Pablo is one of the workers, and Vida is his ex-girlfriend. They're broken up at the beginning of the book. And I had conceived that story was going to go really differently. And so I had plotted it out really differently. And the two sisters, I thought the story would go really differently. I didn't account for any other points of view. So there are several points of views in this story that break my commitment that it should only be employees. So I ended up, the story very unexpectedly, which was not in the outline, ended up being also concerned with like some of the tourists, like some of the people, and they all are like involved in the resort in a meaningful way that is like labor related. So I think like I still was able to like pull some threads of this idea of labor and of this book being like a workbook. I still wanted to like make those connections, but it's really interesting to me because when I had never outlined a book before. And so it gave me a lot of comfort to have an outline, because I feel like every time I came to my laptop, I had a job to do, and I was determined to like meet my deadline, because as you know, my first book was a 15-year journey. And if there was one thing I wasn't going to do was take another decade or more on my next book. And so I feel the outline helped me with that. But I mean, I think I also learned that even when you want to force a story to do something, the narrative has its own heart and its own energy. And I think that if you like let the story guide you, like something much more interesting happens. Because I do think that this book ended up being much more interesting than the book I outlined.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I think everything that you're saying right there completely resonates. I mean, because like I just told you, I went through this whole proposal journey, blah, blah, blah. I decided just to put it aside, not because I mean, I probably will eventually write that book, just not right now. But you know, my first book was the same way. It was years in the making.
Yes.
And then to just start the second book with the conceit of I'm writing a proposal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I do believe, and I was talking to my son about this the other day, because my son also writes, and I was just, yeah, I do believe definitely in, you know, like following the narrative flow.
Mm-hmm.
But the outline too, there's just some magic right there. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to be, I'm not going to get away from the outline, but yeah, I don't know. It's like, do you think you'll teach differently afterwards, after going through this process is what I'm curious about.
I do believe that this process has changed the way that I think about narratives and the way I think about plot. And so, yeah, I feel like one of the things that I was really fixated in with my first book was really helping my students understand plot, because I feel like so much of what I feel like it was through no fault of the wonderful people at NYU in my MFA program, because I think they taught me so many other things that were critical. But I don't think that I walked away from my MFA understanding how to write a novel, right? I knew how to write like wonderful chapters and like wonderful sentences and make really thorny, interesting characters. But the way that you have to have a novel move, I think is something that, you know, at least during the time when I went to my MFA program 20 years ago, it just wasn't the way that we were taught. Like there was no novel workshop, right? You went to semester by semester and you submitted 2 or 3 chapters or stories. And so you were really looking at your narrative in this kind of constrained way. And so when I finally like realized how I had to rewrite my debut in order to sell it, I just felt like, oh my God, this is the thing that I want all my graduate students to understand, is that even as you are writing a novel, you really want to think about the whole journey and getting through the first draft. And I was also really focused on like propulsion. You want to make the novel, as literary writers, I think we just have to be committed to writing stories that are interesting and have tension and understand why a reader should care about what we're writing about. Because a lot of times the interiority, which is like my favorite thing about novels, right? It's sometimes so insular that you lose the narrative thread and then you lose your reader. And so I think like I was very focused on that for the last few years, I think. And then after writing this book with an outline, I think that in some ways I'm more like a mixture of not just plot is critical, but in some ways this helped me understand too how the best plot moves through the character. You know, it isn't 2 separate things. I think making the outline really made me think about like character motivation and character desire and like stakes in a different way, where I think with my first book I was thinking about it almost like an iterative process, where like you lay down the foundation of the book and then you inject some propulsion and some tension. Where with this book, I think just by the nature of me having a real strong sense of where I wanted the story to go, I became a lot more capable, or maybe more competent, in injecting some of those elements into the character. So that's what's motivating, or like maybe what's activating the plot is the character and not the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, totally. I mean, yeah, because I definitely feel very similar. And it actually was part of it was I had to break apart my first book. It sounds like you did the same thing. You broke apart your first book, and you know, yeah, I don't know. It's fascinating. So definitely current events. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this question without giving a spoiler.
Good luck.
I got it. So this book that is definitely inspired by current events in the Dominican Republic, particularly like the troubles in Haiti, right? Like there was just a scene, and this is not going to spoil anything, but there was I thought you had this one scene where you described Black people being picked up and thrown into deported, and fans to be deported, and how similar that is to like things happening here, right? But also like really, I don't know, it just was, just, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to stop that question there. And I'm going to your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like really good fiction that is really concerned with telling the truth about whatever it is that we're obsessed with as people is always going to resonate with a present moment in the future. And what I mean by that is that the first time that I learned about the Parsley Massacre of
Right.
1937, where, tens of thousands of Haitians were massacred at the command of the Dominican government, I first learned about that through Edwidge Danticat's The Farming of Bones. And I was in my 20s. And now, when I think about the fact that I, went to school until 5th grade in the Dominican Republic, and my grandparents, my father, who was much older than my mother, had all lived through Trujillo, they had been alive during that time. At no point did I learn about it through my family, through my schooling. And it was through literature that I came to understand this really important aspect of my country's history. And I also learned that as an immigrant in the United States. And so when I started traveling back to the United States, I would often see my country through the eyes of that book. I think that book just made me more aware. And in some ways, it just made me more empathetic to what I was witnessing. It made me aware in a way that I think sometimes when you live through, injustice and the horrifying treatment of people, I think when you are desensitized through it because everybody thinks it's just a normal way of living, you almost don't see it. And so I really think that Edwidge Danticat taught me just to pay more attention as a human being, which has really aided me as a writer. And so one of the things that, I thought about when I decided I was going to write this book, and I decided it was going to be about the resort, and I decided that resort was going to be in the Dominican Republic. I mean, I knew pretty quickly that I couldn't write this book without really talking about what's happening with Haitian people in the Dominican Republic. Like it's a horrifying situation there. And especially when you think about the deportation of Dominicans of Haitian descent. I mean, birthright was removed, as a right for Haitian people in the Dominican Republic. That just happened in the last decade, right? So what we're talking about is every time I would go to the Dominican Republic, I would think about that book and think about how far we were from the incidents that happened and also how close we were to the incidents that happened. And the way that I think history has a way of just remaining alive, and like history has a way of taking over the present moment unless you're really vigilant against it. And so, one of the things that I was really committed to in this book was to finding a way to be true to what it means to be a Dominican person on both sides of this debate. Whether you believe that it's just unfortunate, but there isn't much you can do because the system is too big and too vast to be dismantled. Or if you are someone younger, like Elena, who wants to be an activist and believes that there's a way through in which we can, be true to human rights. And so I really wanted to animate some of the concerns that I was experiencing when I traveled back. And I especially wanted this book to be like very much in conversation with The Farming of Bones. Like I almost thought about in which ways can I link the stories so that you could almost use Edwidge Danticat's first book, The Farming of Bones wasn't her first book. I think it was maybe her third book. But I wanted like this book, my second book, to like touch very, very close to the marrow of what she's dealing with in her book, even though my book is completely different than hers, And so, so like part of what I really wanted to do was like to give someone a sense of like exactly what has and hasn't changed since The Farming of Bones. So I interviewed, a lot of Haitian people. I interviewed a lot of workers. Like I interviewed regular Dominicans of Haitian descent who just live in the capital. I interviewed laborers, just to get a sense of what their lives are like. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to be really careful about is that, you know, because I'm not a person that's of Haitian descent, and I don't think that's my story to tell. Like, it's not my story to write from the perspective of a person who is going through that. But what I think I have access to as a storyteller is to get as close as I can to the conditions that create these atrocities. And so I wanted to do it through these characters in my book. And so, you know, I just thought a lot. I did a lot of research about the ways in which the Dominican government and like Dominican people broadly think about Haitian people. And I was really interested in thinking about the way in which these characters that are kind of like caught up in a world that feels very separate from like regular Dominican culture or anything else. They live in a very insular place that's far away from all civilization in a way, have been able to create their own lore. So the last thing I'll say about this is that I was also thinking about history and like the power of literature to like tell people stories they don't know. It happened to me with the Farming of Bones. And so I remember when I was doing research for a very different book that I might still one day write, I found out about the fact that during the 1800s, almost exactly 100 years before the Parkland massacre, the Haitian dictator was occupying, the Haitian president was occupying the Dominican Republic. And during that time, they like extended an invitation to like, you know, freed and enslaved Black Americans to come to the United States. And during that time, thousands of people took it up and they traveled in ships. And like, you know, there were about 2,500 people who ended up settling, and most of them were settled in that Samaná region. That's why I made the location of the resort, you know, a little bit further from there, but that was the area where these Black, formerly enslaved or freedmen ended up. And so I was thinking a lot about like the way that lore, you know, if this town, Pico Diablo, is believed to have been settled by these Black Americans. And so much of the lore in this community is about the fact that all of them are something else. They're not Dominicans and they're not Haitians, you know, there's something else altogether. And so I wanted to like play with this idea because I also haven't read anything where people talk about that part of history of the Dominican Republic. And as an Afro-Latina, why haven't I learned about that? About the fact that there was this connection, right? And so I wanted to really animate the plot and the backstory of this region with like a history that I feel really interesting, and hopefully invite some other writer who reads my book the way that the Farming of Bones inspired me, right? To think about history and think about these gaps in the world of storytelling and education and family oral histories that fall short of really telling us the truth about the places we're from.
Yeah. No, I thought that plot point was so fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I think probably because of Rita Dove, right?
Yes.
That beautiful poem.
Yeah.
I knew about the massacre, but I never had heard about the other. And that was really fascinating to read. So, oh my gosh. I want to I know I have tons of information here. This is the question I really want to end on though, is can you discuss the role of hope in your writing?
Oh my goodness. Thank you for that question.
Yes.
You know, I feel like I'm such a hopeful person in real life.
You are.
And sometimes when I think about literature, it's sometimes very difficult to be hopeful in literature. I think literature requires us to be really truthful about logic in a way that's not real life logic. I think hopeful people, optimistic people like you and I, often diverge from reality to remain hopeful. What's really interesting to me, and I'm so appreciative of this question because I feel like you really understand this book in a really deep way, is because ending this book in a hopeful note was probably the like hardest thing I could do. Like I was like, I knew I wanted to like end the book, especially as it comes to these two women who have like suffered so much in their lives, have suffered so much loss. And I feel like especially Laura, who's very antagonistic, to everybody in the resort, she's everybody's boss. She's a villain, but she's a cartoonish villain, right? Because her backstory has really prevented her from like being, I think, closer to the potential she has to be like, a different kind of person. And so, going through those 7 days when like both Laura and Elena are making some decisions that are just so disturbing for me, I had to be true to that because that's what happened in the book, right? But then I also was thinking a lot about how important it is in this story, especially because I'm also cognitive of like fiction coming out of the Caribbean, and especially the way in which I think many of us are being very truthful to the realities of locals in our islands when it comes to privilege and tourism, class, money. I mean, I think that it's sometimes very difficult for our stories to end in a hopeful note. And so in a way, for me, it was challenge accepted. Like there has to be a way in which I can find redemption for these characters. There has to be a way in which I can bring that optimism and hopefulness that is part of my life, and the way that like my life is guided by this idea that the impossible can be possible, that beautiful things are ahead, even during the most ugly and difficult times. And so, I was really proud of the way I was able to pull off the ending, because I have to tell you, I was writing this book and 3/4 of the way through, I just don't know how I'm going to get myself out of this jam. Like, these people are terrible.
Yeah, totally. No, but yeah, I really I like that. I appreciated that. Yeah, I like that. And I appreciated the way that went, So yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that means so much to me, honestly. I'm just curious, and you could totally cut this out of the interview, but I'm just, as my friend, I'm just very interested in learning for you if you felt the tension of the book was too much. Because that was one of the concerns I had, that the stakes are so high and the tension is so ongoing. Did you find the tension to be a little bit too relentless?
Oh my God, you're asking me. I mean, yeah, it's definitely, it's an intense book. It was more intense than I thought it was going to be, right?
Yeah.
Like it was totally more intense. Looking at the cover, okay. I don't know. It made me think about so many things differently, right?
Yeah.
I did love the way you loop back. And that's the thing, like, I think that when I am best as a writer, I also do that, right? Because I also write about like really intense stuff. But we live in this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, we live in this world. And I don't know, I thought, so this is just us talking, right?
Yeah.
I thought I thought it was so good. The characters and the description. Especially that part, like, we're like, okay, you're going from, there's been a hurricane, right? There's been a hurricane. Then Pablo is going up to the village. That's really the way people live.
Yeah.
That's so true. And you got both of that in there. And that's amazing, right? Or like, they're going to Jarabacoa.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is, and it really, really made me think. Kind of like the way, like, yeah, because when I was growing up, when I was in the DR, of course, I didn't know about like the massacre or anything.
Yeah.
And then, when I went back, I definitely did. And yet, I don't know. It's just interesting, right? Like, it's like you're getting all of that. So no, I thought the way it ended, that was perfect. Is that the question? That's the question. It was fascinating. And then also the pacing was really good. I felt like the pacing was, I literally read it like 2 days or something. Like,
wow.
Yeah, no, I just like went through it, and and I'll definitely read it again. I plan to read it twice, but yeah, I just went right through it. So I felt like I wouldn't have done, I wouldn't have been able to read it if it was. So it wasn't like, is it too intense? No, like, I just went through it, and I wanted to go through it. Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Also, I think you brought up so many things that are so important. Again, I didn't ask you about like the sex trade there.
Yeah.
That was so good. And then you got like the duplicity of like Dulce's complicated. All of them are very complicated.
Yeah.
I love that, you know? Yeah, they all were really complicated people.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really amazing. But they were also human. I didn't think they were cardboard.
Oh my goodness. I have to tell you that one of the things that I got very worried about is just how populated this book is. And there's just so many characters in the book. And one of the things that I really wanted to be able to, I don't know about you, but I have a hard time getting into books with like a shifting point of view. Like,
Okay.
I like, one or two people. I'm like, don't just bring too many people into this, It's almost like when you're listening to a story and too many people are telling you parts, I just get a little annoyed, And so I think it's like really difficult. And so it was really interesting to me that when I realized that it really, in order to do service to what I'm trying to do in this book, which is really to talk about the complex of a resort as a microcosm of the whole world of capitalism, right? And so the only way you can do it is to have this kind of multiphonic narrative. Like you couldn't really do it with one or two characters. It had to keep shifting. And so it's one of the things that I was committed to, was that even characters who only carry the story for a tiny part of the narrative, or characters who really are the protagonists, like I did not want to compromise on their complexities. Like I didn't want to write any characters, regardless of who they are, to feel flat or to feel they're throwaway characters. And so much of what I wanted to do was like to make these characters really complex and, multifaceted, because I think that's all of us are like very complicated and, contradictory. And there's ways in which I think life also makes us complicated depending on our station. I mean, and I think sometimes we don't talk about that, how in some ways wealth can enable you to have almost a more stable personality, or in some ways just have access to be very different and live more up to your ideals or values.
God. The fact that I get to work out on a regular basis, does that improve my mental health? Yes or no?
I mean,
right?
Right. And it's like, and then you think about people who are grumpy or like really short tempered. And you're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that if like that person got to walk in nature an hour a day, like I do, they maybe wouldn't be so short, And so I think about that a lot, like just from my own personal life, the ways in which I think wealth and like just my station in life has changed so drastically from the time that I was a child in the Dominican Republic, and the ways in which I think, it has enabled me to do amazing things, like write books and talk to you,
Yeah.
So I think a lot about that, about like, what does that mean about, just back to your original question, just back to hopefulness and back to, of course I get to be an optimistic person. I have a tremendous life, and so there was just a challenge that I forced myself with this book to be like, just give everybody the best ending you can give them. I think that's important for these kinds of books too.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I have to go back into my first book.
I can't wait for you to do that. I know you got to take the break because you deserve it.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely. It's just, how do I make that hopeful? And I've got ideas. I know how to, but.
Well, you're an incredible person, despite, I mean, that's what I think is wonderful about who you are, like empowered, and the ways in which something could destroy you didn't.
Right. No, totally. No. And I married a nice person. I married a nice family, which on one hand sounds regressive, but on the other hand, that's my support system, right?
That's right.
I have a family. So yeah, thinking about like Lara, for example, like that at the beginning, she's working. Oh my God. And that one woman that like fucking I made all this happen. Like she's working nonstop through the hurricane. Right? I was just like, that was so, you're like, yes, that happens all the time. Like the LinkedIn profile, I thought that was so beautiful. But, yeah. Would that impact, like, yeah, when you're thinking about privilege or whatever, yeah, of course that impacts her. Of course that impacts her motivation. Of course that impacts like how she treats her sister,
Yeah.
who's also kind of like her child. Yeah, no, I mean, I think those are really amazing questions to be thinking about. And I might steal like a tiny bit from this part and like push that up there, like when we're talking about characters, just because I do think I think what you're saying and talking about that consciously, I think that is important, you know?
Yeah, you can move anything around that you want to make it make sense.
Thank
Because
you.
I know the way that we talk sometimes is like
Sometimes
repetitive. Well, thank you for the time. Thank you for the interview. Your questions are, as always, wonderful.
Yeah, no, I had fun putting them together. I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was just fun to go to the DR in my head because it is such a beautiful place. So yeah. All right, hang in there. Talk to you soon. Good luck with everything.
Thank you. Have a good trip. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.